Hi, I'm Greg Braun, Executive Director of the Guardians of Martin County. I'd like to welcome you to our next in our series of podcasts that the Guardians have been doing about various things of interest to not only the Guardians, but just Martin County residents overall. We've had a variety of presentations in the past about water quality, because indeed, for us, surrounded by water, the quality of our water is really directly related to the economy and the quality of life in Martin County. So we're very pleased to be at a different location this time. We're on the shore of Lake Okeechobee. We're not too far from the city of Okeechobee. It's early December, and I'm very pleased to have as our guest Paul Gray from Audubon Florida. Paul is a scientist who's been working on Lake Okeechobee for over 30 years, and he probably knows more about the lake than anybody else. So Paul, thank you for taking the time. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into some discussion about the lake.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I work for Audubon Florida. I'm in our Everglades restoration program. My background is in ecology. I did my dissertation work on this lake working on ducks. So I've been here for a long time. And what I do, I work for a policy team, and we work on the Everglades, but the Everglades, actually, the headwaters of it starts at the Orlando International Airport. And it's about 100 miles from there to Lake Okeechobee. And so I work in what we call the Northern Everglades, which is this northern part is the Okeechobee watershed. And we have other people who specialize in the southern part of the system.
And the link of that is because the historic Everglades was actually in part of Martin County, right? The western part of the county?
Yes.
Used to have some sawgrass marsh and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we're sitting here right on top of the Herbert Hoover Dike. And it was built obviously for flood control and water supply and all that kind of stuff. But the historic edge of Lake Okeechobee was about 4 miles north of here, right on the edge of the town of Okeechobee. And we built this dike all the way around the lake, and we isolated marshes all around the outside of the lake. So the lake's only like 2/3 or 3/4 the size it used to be. And all these marshes that were outside of the lake are now dry and are being used for agriculture and houses and stuff like that.
Yeah, so 730 square miles. It's hard for a lot of people to fathom how big the lake is. But I'm going to suggest that for those Martin County residents who haven't been out there, take a drive out Canner Highway all the way to the end, and you can access Lake Okeechobee at the Port Myakka locks off of Highway 441 and 998. You can drive up onto the top of the Hoover Dike, get a good view out over the lake. And what a lot of people probably don't realize is that Martin County's boundary actually extends out into the middle of Lake Okeechobee. So there's over 60,000 acres in Martin County that is submerged lands of Lake Okeechobee. So that's more than 10 times the city of Stewart. I mean, just think of that. You can go out to the edge of the lake. It's a beautiful place to see sunsets and that sort of thing, but there's sort of an uneasy calm about Lake Okeechobee, because often the water looks calm, but as soon as we get heavy winds, it stirs up those mucky sediments that Paul's going to tell us about, and it creates a lot of the kind of water quality problems that we have. So Paul, launch in, if you would, a little bit about the history. You mentioned the construction of the Hoover Dike, which was after a devastating flood that killed over 1,000 people, right?
Yeah, so well, just in reference to Port Myakka, you go 30 miles that way, you'll get there. And the lake's like 30 to 35 miles across, depending on which way you go. And when you get out in the middle, you can't see shore in any direction. It's an inland ocean. And so the soil south of the lake, the Everglades soils, are organic peat soils that formed over thousands of years. And when we first got here, everybody wanted to farm them, but they were underwater. So we built the early Hoover Dike, which wasn't much of a dike, and they were trying to lower the lake. The lake used to be around 20 to 24 feet. Now we try to keep it 12 to 15.
That's feet above mean sea level. That's not the depth of the lake.
Well, actually, the bottom of the lake is right at sea level. So when the lake's at 15 feet, the deepest spot in the lake is about 15. But the average across the lake is like 7 or something. It's really, really shallow. And so when they lowered the lake, they dried out those muck soils so people could try to farm them. But then we had a big hurricane in 1926 and it put a 12-foot storm surge over the town of Moorhaven. It killed about 500 people. In 1928, another storm came in, and it did a 12-foot storm surge over the town of Belglade, and that killed 2,500 to 3,000 people. And it also killed people up here in Okeechobee. The storm, sloshed that way and then it sloshed back this way. So that's when President Hoover was in office, and they built the Hoover Dike, the southern rim as we know it, to try to protect those communities from storm surge. And this part of the dike was completed in the 1960s as part of the Central Southern Flood Control Project, the CNSF project. It was designed in 1949 and improved because in the 1940s we had some really wet hurricanes, flooded everything from Miami to Orlando. And we went to the Corps of Engineers and said, we want to live here and it's too wet for farms, it's too wet for cities, so can you help us drain your state? And the Corps said, sure. And they designed this system, and it's actually a very good drainage system. And it wasn't complete drainage. They had water conservation areas. They did some really smart things in it. But the problem was one of the engineers on the project said, Florida's got to remember you got two problems. One is floods, and we're building you a very efficient drainage system that goes all the way up to Orlando. The Kissimmee River got strained out in this. But the other is you have droughts. And if you overdrain your state, your droughts are going to be worse. And guess what? We did it.
And we got both of those problems.
Yeah, and now we're spending billions on Everglades restoration to try to build huge reservoirs and stuff to try to catch water, which we used to have for free, but we didn't value our wetlands. But now we're trying to get that water back. And so that's a big challenge for the future of Florida, is we already have water scarcity in a very rainy state because we dump all our water. And again, if you live on the East Coast, you're familiar with Lake Okeechobee dumping down the St. Lucie River. And I was talking to some California agriculture guys. They were here, agriculture leadership, and they were here touring the South Florida Water Management District. And I was talking about our droughts, and they said, do you have droughts? Because they get 10 inches of rain a year. We get 50 to 60. And they're like, how do you get droughts with all that rain? And I said, we dump our water in the ocean. And they looked at me like we were crazy. But anyway, we're now to the point where we can't do that anymore. It's bad for the estuary, but it's even worse for the future of our water supply in Florida. So that CERP is going to rebuild this system and run the water back to the Everglades where it used to go and where it's needed now, and quit dumping it down the estuaries where it's just wasteful and harmful.
Right, yeah. Probably everybody knows CERP, but for those who don't, explain that.
Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program. It was passed in 1999, and it's the first major upgrade of this water management system since the 1940s. So we've gone 70 years, and we have a dilapidated water management system, and so we're rebuilding it and trying to make it more suitable for modern values and a much, much larger human population than we've ever had.
Right, yeah, so I hear the water managers talking about water that is lost to tide. Yeah, I guess that's exactly what we got. We got this precious commodity, and indeed, we're losing it to tide where it's also damaging the estuaries.
Smart. Yeah, well, we had these hurricanes. We had Hurricane Irma, dropped all this water in the watershed. Lake Okeechobee went up 3 feet in 1 month. And they closed all these gates around here because the whole watershed was drained in just 1 month. Historically, that would have taken 6 months for all that water to very, very slowly move to the lake. But now we have all these drainage canals, which are like the freeway for water. And the water just gets in those canals, comes to the lake gets too deep, the Corps gets afraid of the dike, and so they dump all the water on the estuaries. And again, we're going to try to go up into the watershed, part of CERP and part of other projects we need to do, and store as much water as we can. We think we need to store maybe 1 million acre feet, equal to about 2 feet of lake elevation. And that way, when Irma comes by, it raises the lake 3 feet. Faye raised the lake 4 feet. Ian raised the lake 4 feet. And instead of going up 3 or 4 feet, it'll go up 1 or 2 feet. That's manageable. It doesn't put us in an emergency position. And we're going to have a base flow coming into the lake during the dry season because that water is still being metered out to the lake.
Okay. And is that water in the future, is it being stored on public lands or private lands or a combination?
A combination of both. They're going to build one big reservoir. They're trying to up north of the lake, and it would be about 200,000 acre feet, but our goal is 1 million. So we're going to have to find a lot of other storage, and that's one of the things we're doing. Is it's a big watershed, it's 2.6 million acres, and we're talking to landowners and say, if we're going to spend $1 billion to put water in a reservoir, could we just pay you to plug your ditches and hold water on your land when it rains? And so especially with these ranches out here, they have big wetland basins that if you plug their ditches, they can hold a lot of water, and you don't have to pump it or anything. It rains, the water just sits there, and it slowly seeps toward the lake. And so we can pay them to help with our water management things.
But most of those are cattle ranches, aren't they? And they don't want their cattle out there wading around in the wetlands.
Actually,
in the wet areas, whether they're wetlands or not.
Yeah, so these water projects will hold the water longer, but it doesn't really make it any deeper. After a hurricane, everything's flooded and the water goes down. And what we'll do is when your water goes down to where it's just in your pond, your wetland, then that's when they will hold all that remaining water. So for cattle, actually, they like grazing wetlands better than uplands because wetlands have more nutrients in them because they're kind of the sump. And so what they do is they put their cows on the drier land during the wet season, and then during the dry season, they can move them down into the wetlands where the wetter stuff is. Mm-hmm. So they were so hell-bent on draining everything that they overdid it, and now they're all saying, hey, I'm too dry in the dry season. So there's a lot of people that are saying, okay, let's restore some of this hydrology because we need water to get us all the way through the dry season.
Mm-hmm. And we may get to a future, that topic in a future podcast after we've done these major things. You know, we did stormwater treatment areas in the previous one, now Lake Okeechobee. One of those projects is the Calkins Water Farm that is in Martin County, just to the east of the C44 SDA. And I don't know how many acre feet, or thousands of acre feet of water they're holding. But that is a good template for, it sounds like what you're talking about, that's going to be done on a much larger scale.
Yeah, so they're more like a reservoir. They're not really trying to create habitat, and they actually have a lot of percolation down through the sands because the soils over there let the aquifer recharge. And so they're a really good project for storing water and keeping it out of the St. Lucie estuary. But it's deep, and it's not really, on the ranches we're more or less restoring wetlands. And so we're creating habitat. That's not a habitat first project, but it's a water project.
Probably good for ducks, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's good for a lot of things. You'll see ospreys out there and all kinds of stuff. So it's a different kind of a water project, and that's the thing. You know, whatever properties that we could put water on and use to help improve our water management system, we can do it. And they all have different values and different costs and different opportunities, but they're all useful for rebuilding our water management system.
Mm-hmm. And I think that Calkins Water Farm project, that was something that was administered by the South Florida Water Management District. And so I'd like to now get into a little bit of the complexity of the different governmental entities that have their fingers in the pie one way or another of Lake Okeechobee. So the water farming was South Florida Water Management District, but isn't the regulation of Lake Okeechobee and the water levels and all that, that's U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, right?
Correct. When we asked the Corps to build the CNSF project, this big drainage project we have, one of their conditions is if the federal government's going to invest all this money in the state of Florida, that the federal government has to have a say in how the system is managed. And so right now the Corps retains control over the St. Lucie structure and the Caloosahatchee structure because those are the two biggest outlets on the lake. And so the Corps maintains control of that, and they maintain control of the water level in the lake. And of course, they have to consult with the state because they're partners. But in the end, the water level management of Lake Okeechobee is basically up to the Corps.
Okay, but we have water quality problems, and I've heard the Corps repeatedly say, well, they just move water around. They don't have anything to do with the quality of the water. So the reason that the Lake Okeechobee watershed has been designated as impaired is as a result of phosphorus and nitrogen. And the Corps doesn't have anything to do with that. If it's the state's responsibility to be sort of overseeing water quality things, how is it that the quality of the water in the lake is so bad? Or is it bad?
I've got bad news for you.
Okay.
The lake, of course, is getting algae blooms, the cyanobacteria, the harmful algae, and the lake historically probably was about 20 to 40 parts per billion phosphorus. When it started getting nutrient enriched after World War II, and we started farming and doing all of our industrial agriculture, the phosphorus levels went from 40, and now they're between 100 to 200. And after a hurricane, they can be really high because they stir up all the mud, and it's just awful, but it's settled back out. But so right now we're at 100 to 200. We want to get back down to 40. But it turns out to get to 40, we have to have about 105 tons of inflow on average into the lake of phosphorus a year, 105. We've been averaging 500.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so then the district did a study and said, okay, we have these 500-ton years. We want 100 tons. How much phosphorus is up here? And they did some measurements of the soils, and they did some calculations, and it looks like we've already put out in the last 70, 80 years, enough phosphorus to have 500-ton years for at least 20 more years and maybe 50.
Without adding any other...
Assuming we quit adding, we're still adding. And so that's a big problem. One of the things, we can build filter marshes and things like that to try to clean the water. But when we talked about after Hurricane Irma or Faye, Tropical Storm Faye or Ian, when you get 3 or 4 feet of water in the lake in 1 month, that's 1 to 2 million acre feet of water. And all the STAs in the southern rim of the EAA, they can only treat about 1 million in a year. And we're getting more than that in 1 month. And so that's the other reason why we got to store all this water north of the lake, is you got to slow it down long enough that if we can just stop it up there and then move it in a more orderly fashion, then we can put in filters and different kinds of technology to clean the water. So it's a long-term big problem. We're working on the Everglades restoration. We're really making progress in leaps and bounds. But after CERP is mostly built, we're going to have to come back and say, okay, what can we do with Lake Okeechobee? Because until we fix this lake, until we fix this watershed, we're going to continue. Everybody downstream of it's going to have trouble. It goes downhill.
Right. Yeah. Lake Okeechobee is sometimes called the liquid heart of Florida, and so indeed everything's flowing out from there. So, what you were talking about there with the Kissimmee River, I know they used to provide tours on the Kissimmee to show you both the channelized portion and then the restored flow. Are those kind of tours open to the public now?
Yes. Florida Atlantic University has their River Woods Field Station, and they have a pontoon boat, and they still are doing tours. And you can contact them. It's River Woods Field Station. And so we've largely restored the Kissimmee River. We filled in half the channel, and it's now a broad floodplain. So that's one really good news, big project. But the other thing is we have all this nutrient pollution. It's coming from mostly agriculture. And so when we do these water projects with landowners, we're also stopping those nutrients from moving off their property. And so, again, it's part of this multifaceted thing that we've got to do to try to get this watershed back to a better condition. Because we weren't careful enough. We didn't protect wetlands well enough. We didn't. The best management practices for agriculture were not strong enough, and they still need to be stronger. But we also want to keep this in agriculture. We don't want it to be rooftops, because once you get rooftops, then you don't have very many options. That agricultural people are professional land and nutrient and water managers. And so we just got to say, okay, we want to keep you here, but we got to get rid of these problems. And so we're going to work with you and do cost share projects and water storage projects and just try to take this wonderful green and blue watershed and keep it that way, but improve some of the problems that we have.
So that certainly makes sense. We don't want tens of thousands of more homes in areas that could be filter marshes and recharging the aquifer and providing habitat, that sort of thing. But if it's taking thousands of acres worth of those marshes and we're still, doesn't sound like really making a dent in it, are there other sort of physical filtration options that are feasible that could take those nutrients out before they get into the lake?
Yeah, so, when we talk about trying to work with landowners, have them hold more water, we're just in the infancy of that. We haven't done very much yet. We've got quite a few projects that are in the ground. They've been very successful, so we have a model, but we're going to need a lot of money. And then there's also different ways to treat water. You can treat it with chemicals like alum, which leaves byproducts which you don't necessarily want. We can run the water through filter marshes like the STAs, and that will clean the water. There's different kinds of media you can run water through. Even running water through like a big thing of wood chips actually is astonishing how much it'll clean it. So we're looking at different technologies. They've tried growing algae and then harvesting the algae and using it as a product. And we're not far enough along on water cleaning technologies as we wish we were, but we're working on that. And that's, it's something we're going to have to develop because, again, if we're going to have 500-ton years for at least 20 more years, and actually the boundary of that is 20 to 50. So this is a generational problem that we're going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we spent most of the time talking about water quality, and rightfully so, because that's such a key issue for us. But let's talk a little bit about the flora and fauna. You're a biologist, you know what's going on with the critters out here, and certainly Snail kite are a success story, or they seem to be. Tell us a little bit about some of the notable flora and fauna. I've heard limpkins in the background and certainly some gulls and things.
Yeah, so this is part of the marsh of Okeechobee. This is Eagle Bay Island, and Little Grassy. But that's one of the things. About 1/3 of the marsh of the lake is marsh, and so people hear about the algae in the middle of the lake and they think it's just a mud hole. But I have an airboat and I take people out on tours. We ought to be doing this out in the boat. But anyway, but when I take them out in the marsh doesn't have algae blooms because it's got plants. And so the water's clear and it's rainfall driven and it's full of snail kites and waterfowl and wading birds and fish. And it's just this vibrant, beautiful thing. And we get back and everybody's like, I had no idea. And it's huge. You go from this marsh here and go around the rim of the lake, it's like 50 miles down to Belgrade. 50 miles. And it's just marsh all the way. And it's anywhere from 2 to 10 miles wide. So this has a huge marsh, and unless you have an airboat, you can't experience it. And so Okeechobee, it may average 30% of all the snail kite nests a year. In really good years, it's up to 50 or 60, and in bad years, it's almost zero. When we have our drought years, the lake goes real low. But it's got so much wildlife and resources in it. It's just not even funny. And it has this PR problem. We have algae blooms. That's all everybody hears. And it's like, well, there's a lot more to this lake than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess partially the reason that the algae blooms have gotten so much media attention is because of the toxicity related to them. A few years ago, I don't remember which of the series of blooms it was, but when there were the people who were having physical problems just breathing the air around the algae blooms, and I think there were some pets that died because they'd been playing in the water and that sort of thing.
Well, actually, you can't see it on the camera, but those posts over there in the water, that's around the water intake for the city of Okeechobee. So they don't want toxins in the water because that's drinking water for the citizens of the town.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the projects that the Guardians are interested in learning more about is this proposed meat processing facility at Chancey Bay Ranch. And so I was looking into water quality situations associated with that. And I thought, as you just said, Lake Okeechobee was designated as a Class 1 water, drinking water. Mm-hmm. But some of the information there that I found was that portions of the lake are not designated Category 1, that they're 3. Do you know anything about that?
The lake itself is considered a Category 1, and that's drinking water. And 3 is fishable and swimmable, but you don't want to drink it. Mm-hmm. But this lake is actually a Class 1. But as you mentioned, the towns of Pahokee and Belglade and South Bay and Clewiston used to get their drinking water from the lake, and they've now switched off the lake because of the problems with the lake water. So Okeechobee is the only municipality that still gets drinking water out of the lake. I wish we could drink out of the lake. And you can. It's just you have to filter the water. You have to treat it with chlorine, and it makes these trihalomethanes, THMs. Yeah, I think it's trihalomethanes. Anyways, it's a kind of cancer-causing drug, and they actually had a public meeting down in one of the southern towns, and they told pregnant women you shouldn't bathe in the water. And they're like, what are we supposed to do for 9 months? Right. So, again, we don't want this lake to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. So we have a lot of work to do to clean it up, but it's such a special resource, and I've been working on it for all this time, and it's just kind of sad, some of the things we've done kind of mindlessly and sometimes accidentally and sometimes just because we were lazy, but we know how to fix it. We just got to do it.
Well, one of the concerns that we had was certainly supporting the rehabilitation of the Hoover Dike. We don't want a breach that's going to kill people. But the concern was that once the Hoover Dike itself was beefed up, there was going to be a greater tendency or likelihood for agricultural users to lobby for a much deeper lake, which overall, as I understand it, if the lake is kept deeper, that increases the likelihood that there's going to be harmful discharges out through the C-44, the St. Louis Canal. To what extent, in your opinion, does agriculture really have an disproportionately high amount of input into how the lake is being managed.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, the Corps controls the lake levels, and they can decide whether to open the gate or not and lower the lake. But there is a lobby, and the Corps has a mission to provide water supply for people, and so does the South Florida Water Management District. The Corps also has a flood control mission, and part of that is they drain the watershed so people up here don't get flooded, but then the lake gets deep, and then it threatens the coastal communities with releases. And so they got all these things pushing them back and forth. And so the best schedule for the lake with where the Hoover Dike sits now was we'd like to keep it for the health of the lake between 12 and 15 feet. And if you get above 15 feet, you start having problems. And everybody may have heard recently, it got so deep for so long, so many years in a row, that we lost about 75 square miles of plant communities out of the lake. Huge area.
Yeah, and those are the plants that are otherwise cleaning the lake.
Yeah, the seagrasses. It's Vallisneria or eelgrass and peppergrass and hydrilla and stuff. And so the Corps did a drawdown to try to let the water get low enough to let those guys grow back, and it's helping. But that is a big threat in the future. And when they first finished the St. Lucie structure in 1978, that was the biggest structure on the lake. And that's when they went to higher schedules because they said, well, we can hold more water. And their biologist told them, you're going to wreck the lake. It's going to be too deep. And it happened. And so we had lures, which was driven by the lack of safety of the dike. They were worried about the safety.
Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule.
Yeah. That was a water management scheme from 2015 to just like last year, or 28. And so it actually kept the lake a little bit lower, but still not enough lower. But now we have a new schedule because the dike's reinforced and it's very deep. And so lures left the lake in a mess. And now we have a schedule that's going to make it even deeper. But part of that deeper is they're also using the lake to buffer the estuaries. They're not going to be dumping to the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee like they were because they have a safer dike. They have a little bit more flexibility on how long they can hold it up. That's a good thing. And we're not wasting that water. We can try to send it south to the Everglades where it's needed. But we have a capacity problem in the filter marshes. We can't put dirty water in the Everglades, and so we can only run so much water south. And they're building more infrastructure down there, so we're going to be able to move more water south soon. But that's the trade-off. And when the lake's deep and everybody's mad, or when the Corps is releasing water to the estuaries, and the reporters all call me, and they're like, is the Corps screwing up? And I'm like, look, you don't want to be the colonel today. Because either you leave the water in the lake and wreck the lake, or you dump the water in the estuaries and wreck the estuaries, and then we have a water shortage when the next drought comes because we got rid of all our water. And so until we've rebuilt this system, we're stuck with these types of trade-offs. And so, the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, okay, I get what you're doing. I get what your priorities are. They're not necessarily wrong, but it's just, that's the problem is this system was built in the 1940s and it can't do what we need it to. And again, that's why Everglades Restoration is being built, is to give us options. And when it rains, they can fill up that big reservoir up there. We can have people hold water. We're going to have an Everglades Reservoir south of the lake that we can pipe off lake water to that rather than dump it down the estuaries. We have a great big reservoir in the St. Lucie estuary, the C44, and it can hold basin runoff so that every time it rains, your estuary doesn't turn brown or green or whatever. So we're building this stuff, and it's going to make things better. It's not going to fix everything because there's too many of this, but this is really heady times in Everglades Restoration because we're really getting a lot of projects done.
Yeah, well, very good. I know for the overall CERP, aren't there like over 100 different projects that are?
I think it was 68. But most of them are small, but these great big reservoirs are really the keystones to really changing the water management profile. And then we have filter marshes in there, which are going to help clean water. And then there's like Picayune and Strand, that's where the Golden Gate housing development fiasco was. They dug all these ditches and everything, and it's just too wet. And so they've more or less filled in all those ditches, and they restored it's like 50 or 60,000 acres of big cypress type habitat. So there's a lot of progress going on right now. There's going to make parts of Florida much better than they've been recently.
Yeah, well, very good. I know a little bit of optimism there.
You have to have it.
Yeah, you do.
People say, do you have hope? And I'm like, I must. I'm still trying.
That's right. After 30, how many years?
Well, I've been down here for 38.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot more that we can cover. We may take you up on your offer to go out in an airboat with you on a future trip, because we're just sort of literally skimming the surface about Lake Okeechobee in this half-hour-long discussion. But tell me a little bit about how you think residents of the coastal communities can become more knowledgeable and engaged. I mean, certainly Guardians are members of the Rivers Coalition. You're on there every month speaking about Lake Okeechobee. Are there other things that we could be encouraging people to do to become more engaged and knowledgeable?
Yeah, there's a lot of groups, and I don't know how much of a web presence you guys do, but like Audubon, we have our website, and we give legislative updates, we give Everglades updates, we try to make sure people are informed about things that are going on around here. We're not the only group that does that. There's a lot of environmental groups that post a lot of information. And so, try getting on one of their pages and just sign up for newsletters, and you can learn a lot that way, and that could direct you to other things. And like you mentioned, the Rivers Coalition, there's Audubon chapters over there, there's Sierra chapters over there, there's a lot of resources. You just got to tap into them. And that way people will tell you, here's what's happening, here's what's going to happen. If you want to write a letter or call your representatives or your county commissioners or whoever, there's a lot of groups that try to help people understand what's going on and when and how they can help.
Yeah, good suggestions. And actually, the Guardian's podcast producer, Iggy Bialis, his company, Impactful Media Group, is also the group that maintains our website. And so I know we do have links on there for a variety of our sort of colleagues in this sort of thing. But you make a good point. We got to look at that again and perhaps add some additional links in there, because indeed we can't keep up with it all. And so I'm sure linking to Audubon, Thousand Friends of Florida on growth management issues, all of those could indeed be helpful.
And nobody could keep up with it all. I'm a professional and I do this, and people call me all the time about, can you help with this or that? I can't, but I can do what I do. And wherever you live, you can help your neighborhood. You can do something, It's just all of us collectively saying, we want Florida to be as nice as it can be.
One of the links that we ought to make, if we don't have it already on the website, is Todd Thurlow gives updates at the Rivers Coalition meeting on his website, Eye on Lake Okeechobee.
Right.
And have you looked at that? And what do you think about what he's putting together?
Yes, Todd is an attorney by trade, but he's a powerhouse of information. And so he has the latest algae bloom maps of the lake. He has the latest lake levels. He has just it's a wealth of information about how the system's functioning and what's going on. And so that Eye on Lake Okeechobee is really a great site to get on there, and you can just click on his images and learn a ton and keep track of stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, we're at the end of our half-hour-long discussion. The time has flown by. We will take you up on that offer in the future to come back and see a little bit more of this up close and personal. In the meantime, we're putting together our schedule for podcasts for next year. And if any of you listeners have suggestions, let us know. I know one of the things that we're interested in is about the dredging of the muck in the St. Lucie estuary. And so we're hoping to have someone from the Florida Inland Navigation District talk with us about that. Probably the similar kinds of concerns you have about the muck buildup in Lake Okeechobee.
A lot of your muck came from here, and we need to fix both of them.
That's right. Yeah. So thanks again, Paul, for taking the time with us. We'll keep in touch and do whatever we can to support you.
Okay, well, thank you for your work.
Okay.